Hello, and welcome to the most mediocre podcast on the planet. I'm Chris, and this is Average Joe. Let's talk about it. Welcome to a place where you can feel comfortable having those uncomfortable conversations and say the things out loud that we normally don't talk about. So sit back, get comfortable, and let's talk about it. Every generation has a soundtrack, but Generation X, we didn't just listen to music, we built identity around it. And the bands you listened to usually told people who you were: metal, hip hop, alternative, punk, rap. You walk into a room, look at someone and how they were dressed, and you'd know right away what culture they followed. And the music wasn't polished. It was loud. It was honest. It was anti-authority, very rebellious. So today, in Average Joe, let's talk about it. We're going to talk about the music that raised us. And in a previous episode, I did talk about the emotional journey of music, how certain songs can take you back to moments in your life. I also talked about the movies that raised us, right? But tonight, we're just going to talk about music, and we're going to talk about what kind of impact it had and how we adapted growing up with it. So not just the songs that we remember, but the music that quietly shaped how we think, how we see authority, how we see success, and even how we see ourselves. If you grew up Gen X, music wasn't just background noise. It told the story about who you were while you were listening to it. That being said, let me take you back to a time where you were standing around the quad with your friends, and you're looking around, and you see these tribes, if you will. So the Gen X music scene was very defined. So, I'll start 90s, and then we can work back. Nirvana, Metallica, Public Enemy, Pearl Jam. And you can say your music taste was basically your personality. I think that's objective or subjective. It's subjective, for sure, because it really depends on how much of a music lover you really were. For me, music, I think, was everything. Music was a way to escape from the everyday grind of just being at home and being a teenager and just having all that angst build up in you. And it was kind of solitary. I think that I spent a lot of time in my room, of course, involuntary. So I had a very deep relationship with music, we'll say. And so because of that, I was able to sample and get into a lot and search kind of in the way that you do today on streaming if you were looking for something new, or you just hit create station based on your algorithm as it's built for your own personal playlist based on your taste. I was actually doing that manually, just like every other teenage kid back in the 80s and 90s. And for those of us who are a little bit older and still Gen X, the 60s and the 70s. So if you're going to talk about a generation's music, you would have to think about decades of music, because obviously we're still alive. So if you go back and you say, hey, what kind of music was playing in the 60s? And I wonder if they had their little peaks back then, which, we've seen the movies. Even if they're a little bit older and dated as far as we were concerned, it was one of those things where there was always something out there where there was examples of groups of people segregated from other groups of people, and they identified in a certain culture based on preference, whether it be musically, artistically, whatever the case may be. These days we say, I'm a music snob, or, whatever. You're not. You just love music. You love the type of music that you love because it's who you are, and you feel that's what defines you. And that's what the Gen X music generation, I think, brought to the table. So if you go back to in the 60s, what kind of, and it, I'm on the fly, right? And not having any highlights to help me through this, just kind of understanding that there are 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s into the turn of the century. Music was still great all the way through up till then. To me, I think it's kind of wavering, but I think that has a lot to do with my age, and I'm at the point where I think I said this in another episode, is I'm not chasing music anymore, and there's just not enough going on out there where I'm comparing my music to somebody else's music, and we're talking about whose is better, and we're having these huge arguments about yours is trash compared to this, blah 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 blah, or your music sounds like whatever. You know what I'm talking about. We've had these conversations with our friends. So I'm trying to think 60s, did I get into some of the music? Hell yeah, I did. I was always, and I don't know, maybe 60s, 70s. Let's put it that way because it's easier for me because I can't identify too many from the 60s. But like Pink Floyd, I think Pink Floyd was in the 60s and throughout the 70s, 80s, they were huge. They're still huge. They're still touring, doing them crazy shows. Great music though. I mean, amazing ensembles, amazing. The Wall, that was amazing as well. I mean, you can't say enough about Pink Floyd through that era and all that anti-war movement stuff that was going on back then with the Vietnam War. And you think about Jimi Hendrix, the Doors. The Doors are, I mean, I probably overused the word amazing. So we're going to say the Doors were phenomenal. And I mean, you can even listen to them sober and they're still great. It's the same thing with like Pink Floyd. But, you get into Led Zeppelin and there's probably people out there that like it a little bit slower. Maybe they were listening to some Neil Young or maybe if some Neil Diamond. I don't know. That wasn't my cup of tea. So we'll just keep moving it along. So, of course, Led Zeppelin, Stairway to Heaven, Misty Mountain Hop, When the Levee Breaks. I can go on and on and probably name all of the albums and all of the songs on those albums. But, that's my preference. So what else? The Eagles, right? I was raised on the Eagles. There was some country artists kind of similar, back then. I think the large groups that sang harmony together.
There are stars in the southern sky. Southward as you go.
Was kind of big, like the Oak Ridge Boys or Alabama. If we're gonna go back there.
Rolling down a backwoods Tennessee byway, one arm on the wheel, holding my lover with the other, a sweet, soft southern thrill. Worked hard all week, got a little jingle on a Tennessee Saturday night. Couldn't feel better.
But, you're talking 70s, so then Aerosmith and Ozzy or even Black Sabbath before Ozzy. The point is there was a lot of different great music from different genres through and throughout all of those decades, into the 80s with the eyeliner pop music, the synthwave pop, the hair metal, come on, right? And then the birth of, Metallica when Dave Mustaine was originally with them. And then, of course, he went off and established Megadeth, who became great as well. I don't know if they were ever as great as Metallica, but he has definitely left his mark. And you talk about 80s and, rap and hip hop, how that all began, Grandmaster Flash, and who else are we talking about? Like, LL Cool J was great back in the day. Beastie Boys were trendsetters, three white boys from the boroughs bringing it home. And they did a ton of sampling from some of the greats like Led Zeppelin. So there's that. But, if you get into about music tastes and defining your personality and all these different groups that we had standing around at the lunchtime and, in the parking lot at the end of the day, or if you were at a party, it was like everybody would congregate to those people. And I don't know if relationships start with music, but I think they definitely get stronger. I think you can build a relationship with a person if your music tastes are the same. And if they're not, then hopefully you're open-minded enough and accepting enough to say, hey, you know what, I need to see if what this person is saying is true about the music they like and give it a chance. And you might find out that there's not a whole lot of music, unless it's like Yoko Ono, that is really horrible. It's a matter of, can I listen to this album start to finish without skipping any songs? I think that defines a great band. I think for yourself, I suppose. I mean, not everybody can go out there and listen to a Linkin Park album from song 1 to song 15 or however many tracks are on a particular album. But, we all have those bands where we can do that. And in some cases, we may have more than one album that we can listen to nonstop without shuffling. And it almost feels blasphemous to shuffle a great album because you remember hearing it start to finish a certain way, and you heard it like that over and over again, because there was no skipping, there was no shuffling. You had cassettes and you had vinyl records, which was really tough to find the next song if you were trying to skip. I mean, you could really look at the groove, but who's doing that? Because that's impossible. You're just going to fast forward, rewind. You're going to go farther than you want to go. You're going to have to come back. It's a whole thing. But you arguing about music, that was one of the things I think we enjoyed doing. You challenge somebody else's music tastes, and not in a negative way. I think we kind of went back and forth and we teased each other, because I think we were like, hey, I really like this music I'm listening to, and I want you to listen to it too, because, how much better is it to enjoy something? And I think about this, a good analogy is like, I think I laugh more watching a comedy movie or a comedy show, whether it be stand up or whatever, if there's somebody there to share in the laughter. And I think that music's kind of the same way. I think we find music we like, and we hope that the people that are close with us will enjoy the music as well. That's why every time me personally, if I'm DJing a party or something, by no means am I a great DJ. I know what I like. And I think or at least I hope, people are tolerant enough to maybe give the music that I like a chance. But when it doesn't go over very well, it kind of hurts my feelings. And I think we get that way sometimes when we're like, listen to this. And then somebody says, oh, that's trash, man. That's pussy music or whatever. And that was probably a thing back when we were kids. I think we teased each other a lot about stuff like that, whether we did it just for the sake of doing it or we truly thought that the other person's music was trash. I don't know. But I will say that I had a couple friends that was always pushing music on me. And I think one of the things was, I had a good friend that loved Pantera when we were kids. And I mean, they had just come out, Cemetery Gates and Cowboys from Hell album. And I remember, hearing that. And I was like, oh, yeah, this is pretty good. And then, of course, Phil Anselmo, that guy's voice is unlike any other. Well, Chester Bennington, he could probably belt it out too. But, it's few and far between you find somebody who has that impact in music to where it's still good, because you're going to get some of this metal music and this thrash stuff that's just like, and it's, maybe the instruments are enjoyable, but if I can't hear a melody, or there's no harmony, or there's not something that's going, there's no bridge, and it's just like a bunch of screaming, now that's something I can't get into, man. It's going to mess with my PTSD. I got to turn the volume down on that or hit the skip button. But in any case, so Pantera, a good friend of mine turned me on to it. I think it was more of like involuntarily subjected to it. But if you listen to something long enough, your brain rewires itself somehow. And you're like, wow, this is really good. And it wasn't to begin with. I think we've all been there, that we've had that kind of that feeling where, I remember listening to this the first time and it was just awful. And now I can't get enough of it. Yeah. So, and I've tried the theory of like, hey, you know what? I'm going to force myself to listen to this album front to back and see if it works. And sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't. So it all depends. But our message, I think, Gen X, music-wise, was, and it was a strong cultural message. It was, don't fake it. And there were artists that embodied that authenticity. And I won't go back to say like, bands like Def Leppard and Warrant and White Lion and all those hair bands. I mean, I love that music. They were showmen. And kind of like Kiss, right? Kiss, greatest band on earth, right? They were showmen. When the makeup comes off, it's just, I don't know. To me, when you say don't fake it, is that really you, or are you just trying to get an edge on somebody else? So I think that you could probably put hair metal into a whole different category on its own. But artists that embody authenticity, Kurt Cobain, you're talking about a guy, sure, God rest his soul, took his own life, and he saw something different for himself, and it wasn't turning out the way he wanted, but he was always rising up against something, and you have, I keep going back and referencing like Rage Against the Machine, but their lyrics were impactful. Maybe not for me at the time, maybe not for a lot of kids at the time. I don't think we were really correlating it to like politics or anything like that. I think it was just kind of like rise up against authority in general, parents, school, what have you. And I don't think we thought deep enough. But, as an older adult, I look back and I'm like, man, a lot of that stuff applies today. Now, I don't know if I can get behind it I still love the shit out of some Rage Against the Machine, but I think they went a little over the top sometimes. Eddie Vedder, kind of the same way, and Chuck D. It was all, hey, people need to rise up against things that are going on. If you think about the messages that you were hearing, like on Nirvana, Nevermind, if you could even understand some of the vocals, you'd probably have a better understanding of what the message was coming out of Kurt Cobain's mouth. And it wasn't a whole bunch of mumbling and grumblings. It was stuff that had meaning. Chuck D, I mean, fight the power. Come on, Flavor Flav. So Public Enemy, good stuff. Chuck D, very politically charged, right? If anybody's seen Do the Right Thing, kind of that song and Public Enemy, I think, were made big as far as I knew. Talking about back then, I didn't know any better. Public Enemy just sounded cool on the radio, and then you heard them on the soundtrack of Do the Right Thing, and then you kind of put two and two together. You're like, okay, I get it. All right. So Polished doesn't impress. We care about that. You think about the grunge movement, and even like jumping back to the 80s, mid 80s, late 80s, maybe even around, Robert Smith and The Cure, those eyeliner groups that were talking about their feelings, kind of, I don't know. I love that music way more now than I ever did as a kid listening to it when it first came out. And I don't know if it was socially imposed on me to feel a certain way about music. It probably was, just because of the type of people I hung out with. I might be shaped a little differently, I think, if there wasn't always that peer pressure that was right there in your face to say, hey, you know what? I'm going to listen to this in private, because I don't want somebody to think that I'm a mama's boy because I'm listening to that. But you grow up, you mature, and you understand later on. It's like, that music was really good, and it could have been more impactful if I just let it marinate like it should have as a kid. But I let my friends choose when and where I listen to music sometimes, and maybe that was something I shouldn't have done. But I got a lot of really good music influences from those same friends. And who knows, man? I bet you probably ask about 90% of the guys that I used to hang out with. They were like, "Oh yeah, I was listening to that stuff too." But I think outwardly, we project a little something different for most of us, because I didn't really fit categorically into any of those tribes of folks as far as the music culture went, because I listened to pretty much everything. And I don't know if that doesn't go over well with the people that I was hanging out with, but I sure felt like they were kind of listening to all the same music that I was listening to, but I was just picking it out of each and every different friend that I had. So I guess you could say the group as a whole probably molded each other to listen to each other's music. And that's where the kind of the elbow nudging and the not really bullying. You'd be bullying somebody into appreciating your music. That's not how it works. But we were definitely subjected sometimes to say, listen, I don't care. I'm driving and you're in my car. You're going to listen to what I'm listening to. Or you're in my house, and so everybody gets a turn. And so I think that our variety and our diverse palette when it comes to loving all genres of music comes from being in a group of friends that are that way. We kind of force each other, but also, we want, and like I said before, we want to experience these things together. If you love something, you want to share it with others, right? Thank God for social media. In any case, you can reflect on how that shaped your attitude, right? Towards work, leadership, success, authority. And so being authentic at the end of the day is way better than being popular. So music that challenged authority, because this is a big generational trait, I feel like. And none of this crap you see on the videos now, people are just doing it for clicks. We were truly in our field, so to speak, when it came to challenging the idea of, institutions and authority, suicidal tendencies, Rage Against the Machine, Ice-T, Nine Inch Nails, maybe. I think that you're talking about a guy who was in his feelings. Listen to Pretty Hate Machine now, and I don't know who that girl was that broke his heart, but yeah, I'd go find her and beat her ass for him. But he did make some good music, and he still does. So as Gen X folks, not comfortable with institutions, not back then. Like, I often wonder, how many of us are out there. Well, I mean, we have to be, right? I mean, we're probably the most popular generation right now, or the most populous generation right now. If you think about, I'm 50, the upwards would be 65, and then the young is like, what, 40? So, we're right there in the center of it all. So if you're saying, hey, there's people out there that are probably politicians, lawmakers, law enforcement officers, first responders, folks in the military, or actually Gen X is running the world right now, if you think about it, being the median age that we are at this moment. So I can't really say that, now are we not comfortable with institutions? I guess if you held on to that since you were a teenager, probably not. But to put it in a perspective, a lot of music we grew up with, you encountered and you were encouraged questioning the system. And you can say it taught us skepticism, and it taught us to always ask the hard questions, because regardless if you like the answers or not, it's something you need to do. So, and that carries on to adulthood. So let's roll in nostalgia. Record stores. Tower Records in Arizona, where I grew up, it was called Zia's. And I know there was something else besides Tower Records, but I remember the sign and big yellow lit up with the red lettering says Tower Records on the side of the building. And you go in there and you can spend days. Kind of like I remember when Best Buy first opened up. I mean, it was a toy store for adult dudes. And so that's how I felt in a record store or any kind of store that sold music, Sam Goodies. I mean, I'm trying to think of what else was out. But hey, in any case, right? Those stores were out there. What I liked about the Zia store that I mentioned was because you get tired of an album, if that was even possible. Maybe you picked one up and you said, oh, this is shit. And what am I going to do with it? Right. Luckily, there were places that you could take these back to and say, hey, I want credit. And they got people in the store by doing that. It was like this relentless cycle of folks showing up with some used music, whether it be cassettes. I think it was even during the CD stages too, but definitely vinyl records. And I got a couple of great box sets from there. I remember I got the Alice in Chains box set, and I also got a Pantera box set, which had 3 CDs in it and stuff that people aren't even familiar with. But in any case, that's besides the point. What the point is we had record stores, and to be able to go in there and to sample, you put the headphones on at the little listening station and you choose what you want. And of course, you're not going to be able to listen to everything. And in the beginning, you didn't have the opportunity to do that. So, walking through those record stores, I'll tell you what, I never knew where to start. I felt like you had to have a plan and a map before you went in there, because if you didn't, I think you'd be there a few hours. And granted, at the mall, if that's where you went, instead of going to the actual store itself, and you went to one of the smaller ones, it was still kind of the same way. You go in there, if they didn't have any listening stations for you to try out new music, you kind of had to know what you wanted and what you wanted to listen to. Or, you definitely, I think I had a plan. Sometimes I knew when a new album was about to drop. I knew at least right about the time where I thought some of the music that I was listening to, something new was coming out, and I would be able to go, and you could buy singles. You didn't have the 20 spot to go put down on a full album, whether it be a cassette or whatever. I can't remember back then how much it was, but I do know that by and large, you could buy a single, which was a cassette and just a little bit of tape on the inside of there. That's all you had in your cassette. And you might got like this bonus track on the other side, but you were there to buy a single, just the one song, and you probably heard it being played on regular mainstream radio. And you're like, I don't want to go I don't want to go all in. So if you were poor like me and you couldn't go all in on the full album, you would go and find a single that you were attached to. Who cares what the rest of the music sounded like? Because back then you really couldn't get a taste for them all. It was all or nothing, really. You heard the one song and you said, you know what? I'm going to go get that. And if you weren't familiar with the band, or somebody was up and coming, whatever the case may be, you're like, you know what? I don't care. I'm going to pay the $10, $15, $20, however much it is for the damn cassette or the damn album. And we'll just see how it goes from there. And that's how a lot of stuff got, turned back in, used for credit at some of these places, because you didn't know. And it wasn't like it is now, where you can stream and be like, I'm just gonna hand pick some of these that I know are good. And a lot of times it's already helpful because there's a little asterisk that tells you what's been played the most. Spotify is good about that, and so is Apple Music. Times have changed. But I bought a single, and I probably had more than one, but one I remember in particular was Lita Ford. And there was two songs, right? You say the A side and the B side of the tape. And I'm digging furiously in my Rolodex of music and songs, and there's there's not a lot, right? Lita Ford, and there wasn't a whole lot there. I think she started out in a band, and then she tried to do it on her own, and she did like two songs that were really great. One was a duet with Ozzy Osbourne, and that's what I bought the single for, because I didn't know who Lita Ford was. I just heard the song, and I'm like, I love Ozzy, and Lita sounds great too. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pick this up. So if I can remember later on, and maybe I'll just do myself a favor and just put it up on the screen, because I'm sure that I'm going to go Google it later. And then when I go back and post, I'll stick it up under here and say, you dumb. Don't you remember? This was the name of the song. How could you forget? You wore that damn tape out. Yes, I did. Mixtapes. Lord. It was referenced the fact that I was kind of poor. I wouldn't say I was like poor in the sense where it was hard to keep food on the table kind of poor. It was poor that my parents didn't give me any kind of allowance or anything. So I was never as lucky enough to go out and be able, before getting a job later in my teenage years, I was never lucky enough to be able to get out and buy my own stuff. So it was definitely a treat when I did have money. But in the subject of mixtapes is a different animal. I did have a dual cassette stereo at the time that I could record one off of another, but you have to have that music first unless you borrowed it from somebody. Now, if somebody had a cassette and they were nice enough to let you borrow it and then you dubbed it, then you would have a copy of it, right? And so I can't even believe I was able to bring that word dub out from the unknown depths of history into the forefront today, but there it was, dub. So speaking of that, and speaking about not having money, right? You can go out and buy all Memorex blank tapes if you've got money to do so. They came in packs of like 10 and whatnot. But once again, a pocket full of change ain't going to buy you a pocket full of anything. So what I would do is I would do sacrifice. There would be some sacrifices made. And I would say, hey, this album I no longer like anymore, or maybe it was a recycled mixtape, but for the most part it was a cassette that to me was becoming obsolete. And what you could do is there was these two little holes, because okay, so here's the deal, right? Everybody knows what I'm talking about. It's not like I need to mansplain it, but you'd stick the damn paper in those holes, so then that way you could actually hit record. And it was kind of like, I don't want to say it was like a safety device or whatever, but it was a bypass, because you could not record over an already recorded tape. Number one, it sounds like crap, but I made it happen anyway. And number two, they have the mechanism inside the cassette player that if you hit record, there's these two holes at the top of the cassettes. So for those of you who don't know, right, there was a bypass, and you could record over an older cassette tape just by sticking little paper in these little slots. So I did that quite a bit, and I had to get over the fact that I could hear in the background what used to be on that cassette. Granted, it was faint, right? You couldn't really hear it so well, and you get used to doing that. So I did that, and hey, man, you can judge. It's all good. I know I had some mixtapes, and then when I was able to make an actual mixtape, and I've made my share of mixed DVDs as well back in the Napster days. I think that's where a lot of the music that I enjoyed came from, because I was putting together all these different genres of music. And, I wouldn't organize it and say, hey, listen, this is going to be an all metal tape. This is my metal mixtape. No, mixtape was exactly, to me, what it was intended to be. And that's a little bit of everything, of all the stuff that I love, or as much as I could fit. And boy, what a pain in the ass was it to make those, right? And if you did them for a girl, God bless you. I'm not sure if I did or not. I can't remember. I probably blacked out. I don't want to think about it. In any case, we've all had our share of making mixtapes. Radio DJs, what a great job. I don't know how they do it now. I don't know how they maintain a life, as far, because I think there was more going on with radio DJs back in the day. There was even pirate radio. radio stations on regular radio FM dials was probably some of the greatest stuff. And then the late night radio. I just keep jumping back and I'm getting off topic, but it all makes sense for what we're talking about, right? So the music that raised us, well, being a radio DJ and having somebody out there that's in charge of your destiny when you're listening with your headphones late at night at a lower volume because you don't want to wake your parents up. Those late night listens were great too, especially when there was those late night talk shows or whatever. And now it's like, you think back, it's like, man, that was kind of like where podcasts started, folks just shooting the shit in the middle of the night, midnight, the Dr. Demento show and some other weird shit, right? Casey Kasem and Rick Dees. I was raised on the West Coast, so that's what I remember. And then, of course, Howard Stern later on. But he wasn't really a DJ. He might have been before I met him over the radio. I didn't meet him in real life. But in any case. And then how else do we get music? Word of mouth. So all those things, understanding, I got to get to a record store. I have a plan. I know what I want because I've been waiting for it to drop. Mixtapes, you're going to make your own. DJs, God bless them if you're still out there. And of course, word of mouth. I think word of mouth probably got me interested in more music and types of music, bands, albums, genres than anybody else in that list. Music discovery, if you haven't figured it out, it took work. There was a lot of effort that was put into finding music, finding new music, and actually being able to listen to it whenever you wanted. And that included saving money for albums. You got to listen to a full record. You can't just rewind or reset or whatever. If you missed it, you missed it. It was gone. You got to wait till the next time, especially if you heard it on the radio and you're like, man, I didn't, you turn the station and you're in the middle of your favorite song and you don't have it anywhere else. You can't just pop it in and play it. You don't have this library like you do now. So being comfortable with your music choices and readily identifying who you are and who that makes you as a person, if you identify with music that way, creates a certain kind of confidence. Being comfortable in anything will create confidence, but some music can create the kind of confidence that maybe you're going to take someone home tonight kind of confidence without even trying. Just be weird how music has that kind of impact on you to where it's hitting something inside of you. It is adjusting your neurons. It is rewiring your nervous system. And it is imposing a chemical imbalance that you've never felt before. And that just blows me away. And that's kind of the science behind it. So I'd be curious, like I said, I think in the other episode, there's got to be some more to it than that. So maybe that's something I can do a podcast on. Certain genres reinforce confidence and independence. The hip hop culture, going back to, LL Cool J and the Beastie Boys and Public Enemy, metal intensity, grunge authenticity. So I'd say examples of that would be, and one I haven't mentioned yet is Run DMC. So think of it like how good were they? And they had a thing, right? Everybody had this shtick where, we're going to dress a certain way. There is a bit of showmanship going on there. And of course there should be. I mean, Diamond Dave, right? Talk about Van Halen. The dude can do some kicks. Kiss, I've seen them in concert and they came in ahead of Aerosmith. I don't know how they were opening for Aerosmith, but they were. But after their set was over. I was done. I was like, I tried to sit through the first couple songs in the Aerosmith set and I was bored and I ended up leaving. So showmanship has a large portion of how good music can be, at least live, right? But at the same time, and I miss it, is music videos. Music videos, were complimentary. And I think a lot of music was driven back in the day when MTV came along to say, hey, we're going to build music. We're going to start building music around making a really great video. And I think that's where a lot of good music came from too, was I think one begets the other. So if you say, listen, I've got this really great idea for a song, but first let's talk about how we're going to run the video. And then they kind of meld those two things together. So the artistry combines the music making with the filmography and then understanding, hey, how are we going to portray this message? And so when I think about like same thing if you're writing a book, what makes sense? Right? Like what do you build first? You got to build the world before you start building the story. Sure, you understand what kind of the story is about, but that world has to be built around the idea. And this might be a tangent, but I think it's a good thing to think about is like how much impact did knowing you were going to be making a music video for your music, how much impact did that make on how you made that music? So I'd be curious if there was an interview to be had um, to talk about that. Beastie Boys, same thing, right? Anti whatever, but they kind of did it humorously. We want to fight for our right to party. Who hasn't said that? And then some of the music was it was a lot of humor. License to Ill, probably the best album the Beastie Boys put out. There's a lot of other ones there, but I don't think, once again, it's one of those albums that I can listen to start to finish without skipping and I can't shuffle it or it's just not right. But, their follow on music, just like I think a lot of times, if you can get a sophomore album out and then people latch on to that, I don't think you're going anywhere for a while. You're a mainstay. You're going to be in the family, so to speak, for quite some time. And even if you don't blow up on your second album and you get like 2 or 3 songs out of it, maybe even if you get one, there's always that comeback album. And I'm wondering right now if you could think of an artist out there who really blew it up and came on the scene hard and heavy, and then it was like poof, they magically disappeared, and then they came back years later, and then bam. I can't think of anybody right now at the top of my head because it's kind of hard to do because I didn't even plan to mention it. But if you have something, or if you're thinking of someone or a band that you think relates to what I just said, then shoot it down in the comments. I'd be curious to know, and I'll put mine down there too. A lot of the music we grew up with encourage you to be unapologetically yourself. That's a lot. That's a lot to say. I think what I mean to say is that it allowed you to feel comfortable in your skin. I like that a lot better. And then the idea of that, of course, it carries on through adulthood. And I hate to mix business with pleasure, but there's a music and a work ethic, and this is unique, right? So you talk about how many Gen X artists come from garages, underground scenes, independent labels, places out of nowhere to where 1 minute you're like, I never heard of this person, to the point where I think that's where a lot of the music that was really great came from, especially if you'd never heard it before and you had a friend come beating down your door about it, telling you about how great it was and force feeding you, and then you finally getting it. There was a lot of that. I think there was a time period where it was like, there was a ton. There was many, many times. A lot of the artists we respected didn't come from polished pipelines. There wasn't a music mill of people forming a line in succession, taking turns, being great, and bringing music to us. So that pipeline come from the darkness. And I think a lot of people just expect that artists like that, singers and bands, they're groomed that way. And they just wake up with a guitar in their hand or a microphone in their hand, and then they find each other and they make amazing music for us. That is definitely not the way it works. You read enough about some of these groups and these bands and these singers, and you kind of get into their lives a little bit more than just what you see at face value, which is them on TV or on the radio, singing your favorite songs and playing your favorite music. They're real people with real issues, and they had to start somewhere too. Now, did some of them forget where they came from? Sure they did. People do that. But it didn't stop them from making us great music. They built their credibility with us, and that idea that resonates with our Gen X values. So when you're thinking about music and you're thinking about where some of this comes from and how it shaped you and how it made your experience growing up better, you can set aside all of the artist's political views, and if there's a message that you don't agree with, but you agree with how it sounds and you agree with how it makes you tap your feet or bang your hand on the dashboard or drive faster or smile, you can definitely thank them for that. And I know that, us being who we are as a generation, I think we've already identified that. And I think that on a certain level, if you got us all in the same room, we would definitely be speaking the same language. And I think if there was ever a civil war, it'd be Gen X against the world. I know that's a stupid thing to say, but that's how I feel. I don't feel like anybody has a generation that's as cool as us, and I think that we, come from a long line of parents who let us do what we wanted to do, and that allowed us to be who we wanted to be and listen to whatever we wanted to listen to. So, how every generation grows up with a soundtrack? I think every person in that generation grows up with a soundtrack as well. So you could go a little bit nuts and bolts, go granular and say, sure, we had like 4 or 5 great decades of music, and now the hose is trickling. The same hose that we would drink from on a hot summer day that tasted like metal, but was oh so delicious. But we did. We had a soundtrack. The soundtrack was amazing, and I didn't mention so many great artists, and I feel really bad about that. But if I did, and I named them start to finish, starting with the 60s all the way up until present, this would be like a 3 seasons, 20 episode season, and I would just be naming off musicians and groups. So, but shout out to Corn Man, because I didn't mention them, and I got to bring them up. I think that if there was a group out there that culminated all the things that I was feeling inside and in my mind, and it helped me to listen to that music, and it put me in a place where I never thought I could be. And then you think about what it sounds like and how hard it sounds and some of the emotion that's coming out of Jonathan Davis. You would say, God, that's awful. But it's not, because all of that music that I mentioned throughout this entire podcast, it affects you in a certain way. It helps you to grow. And I think that even if you're learning what that message was in that music when you didn't initially understand it to begin with, but you do now, subconsciously, it has molded you into an amazing human being. So the music we grew up with didn't just entertain us. It shaped our sense of identity, authenticity, and independence. And was I reading that? Yes, I was, but that's okay. So the final thought for the day is music just didn't influence our memories. It influenced our mindset. What artists define your generation? And when I say your generation, my generation X might be different than your generation X. And that's because there's a lot of overlapping decades there. But if any of what I've said resonates with you, let's have a conversation in the comments. And maybe there's some other content that I can create that will, stimulate some of this nostalgia that I keep going back to. But at the end of the day, it's us. And is it us against the world? No, it's not us against the world. You know why it's not us against the world? It's because we are the world. Generation X is now. We are who we are because of where we came from, what we listened to, what experiences we had that shaped us to this day. And we're bringing that. We're bringing that right now. We are the majority of the population in the world. And we should be proud of the people that we are. And be proud of the music you listen to that made you the person that you are today. With that, I bid you adieu. I say thank you for showing up again. It is my pleasure to just talk aimlessly about things that I love and enjoy and hope others love and enjoy as well. If you have any ideas, like I said, about things you'd like to have me talk about, just go ahead and throw them in the comment section. If not, I'm glad you let me bend your ear today. And until next time, thank you for coming. And be safe. That's good American coffee. Hey everyone, this podcast was brought to you by Not a Bystander. And that's that brand right there, my brand. And what we do is we support first responders and military folks with brand name apparel that depicts them in action. And otherwise. So it is a culture apparel vibe for our first responders themselves and our military, as well as the people that support them. If you go to notabystander.com right now and sign up to our email list, you will automatically get 10% off your first purchase. And there's always good deals and good drops coming out quite often. And every purchase, 10% of the proceeds go to Tunnel to Towers to support those same first responders and veterans of the military. On a bigger level, Tunnel to Towers is a great mission, and Not a Bystander stands behind it and with it to support some of the great things that they're doing out there. And just to name a couple is giving severely and traumatically injured veterans and military members, as well as first responders, mortgage-free homes. And they are in the process of helping to eradicate veteran homelessness. So if that's a cause that you can get behind, then go to notabystander.com, show your support for your local frontline heroes, as well as Tunnel to Towers. And if you like what you're hearing and seeing in these podcasts, and you'd like to see more content come across your feed, then by all means, smash that like, subscribe, get notified button right now, and we'll see you next time. Hey, thanks for showing up today. And for any of us that are out there carrying more than we like to say out loud, let's keep the conversation going on the next episode.